New Orleans Saints defensive ends Chase Young and Carl Granderson will benefit greatly from Brandon Staley's new 3-4 scheme. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the Saints will need to weed out the self-inflicted wounds in order to get out of their own way in 2025. And we're going to take a look at the 3-4 defense and the benefits that it brings. We're going to get to the how, but we're going to start with the why, and in particular, why this defense is going to be a perfect fit and will maximize the talents of guys like Chase Young and Carl Granderson. We got all that coming up for you on today's show. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Head over to monarchmoney.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 50% off of your first year. The New Orleans Saints are implementing their new 3-4 defensive system under new defensive coordinator Brandon Staley. And as a part of that, are going to see and should see some major improvements when it comes to their edge rushing, particularly when it comes to guys like Chase Young and Carl Granderson. I want to start with the why, and then we're going to deep dive into the how here in a little bit. But in particular, the reason why I think that this 3-4 defensive scheme is going to work so well for New Orleans is because of guys like Chase Young and Carl Granderson. Typically speaking, when you go through this big philosophy change over on either side of the football, but in particular, like a situation that the Saints are in, where they're going to be going through a philosophy change effectively for all three phases of the game, with even a new special teams coordinator at the helm and Phil Galliano, granted somebody that's been here in New Orleans for quite a while. But with all three of those sort of philosophy changes for a team that's going through a rebuild, a reload, that's changing identity effectively, usually that's also accompanied with trying to figure out a way to make all of it happen with new talent. And this is a unique situation. Brandon Staley is walking in to a situation here where he has two established and experienced edge rushers that are ready to plug and play that he can hit the ground running with. It's not a situation where he's having to walk in and he's got a rookie here and a first-year guy there, so on and so forth. These guys are NFL veterans and at least have some experience with what it is that the Saints were doing before so that he can better translate what it is that they're going to do next. So I do think that the pre-existing talent is something that ends up being a little bit of a difference maker for the Saints, for Brandon Staley, and in particular for the guys that are going to be plugging in, like Chase Young, as well as Carl Granderson. So speaking of Chase Young and Carl Granderson, not only are they guys that were experienced already, but they are guys that had success last year in Dennis Allen's defense. Now, that success is going to be a little bit limited, right? Because they were good pressure players, but they didn't always get to the quarterback. While pressures as a whole, defensive pressures, are a combination of sacks as well as quarterback hits, so you make contact with the quarterback, but he got the ball out, or hurries, which is when you get close enough to the quarterback that you move them off of their spot or you speed up their clock, you get a certain level of separation away from them. Different sites count them differently, all those other things. But pressures are all three of those things combined. And last year, Chase Young had 73 total pressures according to and per Next Gen Stats. That was number 6 in the NFL amongst defensive linemen. The next one that you're going to be paying attention to, of course, is Carl Granderson, who had 58. He was number 17. So they were both top 20 pressure players in the league. But where the discrepancy comes in is that they each only had 5.5 sacks apiece. So you're talking about 73 pressures for one, 58 pressures for the other, but only 11 combined sacks between the two. This is a big place where the Saints are going to need to take a step forward. And I think that this 3-4 defense, allowing them to stand up, use their athleticism, and do things that are going to be kind of playing a little bit more to their strengths off the edge, is going to help them get there, or should help them get there. Like if anything's going to get them there, I think this will be the thing. And of course, they're not the only ones that are going to benefit from this, right? Cam Jordan's probably going to play more of a rotational role in 2025, much like he played last year in 2024. But this is a system that could help him as a pass rusher, but also as a run defender, because he's going to be able to also put his hand in the dirt as a 3-4 defensive end if they ask him to do that. You think about a guy like Isaiah Foskey, who stands to benefit from this because this is effectively the type of defense that he ran in very successfully when he set Notre Dame's all-time sack record. Fadil Diggs, this is going to feel very familiar. Jasheen Davis, it'll feel very familiar. Chris Rumph, it'll feel very familiar. So the Saints also kind of get to benefit from this, not just from these two guys that we're kind of pillaring up as the most important, but really all of these edge rushers are going to see some kind of positive impact fitting into this new defensive set. So now that we've kind of laid out who benefits from this and who I believe will benefit the most from it, let's take a look at a little bit of the why. How does this happen? What exactly is a 3-4? All that. So a 3-4 defense is the opposite of a 4-3 defense. Where we talk about 4-3, we talk about 4 down linemen, 3 linebackers here. We talk about 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers, but 2 of those linebackers are typically inside coverage guys, and then the 2 on the outside are either full-time edge rushers or hybrid edge rusher drop into coverage kind of guys. And yes, you will ask these players to drop into coverage. You will see Chase Young in coverage in the flat and Carl Granderson in coverage in the flat, because you have to create some level of unpredictability with these players. They can't just rush all the time. You have to give that offensive line some kind of hesitancy or pause or thinking. It doesn't mean that you're going to drop them in the coverage 30, 40 times a game, but you're going to drop them in the coverage a handful of times throughout a couple of games, and that's going to have an impact. So you do want a little bit of that unpredictability, but that's the basic of the 3-4, right? 3 down linemen, 4 linebackers, as opposed to 4 down linemen and 3 linebackers. In this scenario, 2 of those 4 linebackers are edge rushers. So now we look at the Brandon Staley side of it, right? 3-4, but what is it that Brandon Staley has brought in his time? Well, he's found success running his system before. In 2023 with the Chargers, his leading sack artist or sack player was Khalil Mack with 17 sacks. He was also the leader in 2022 with 8 sacks. You go back, it was Joey Bosa in 2021 with 10.5. And then as the defensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams in 2020, it was Aaron Donald with 13.5, the best defensive player to ever play, one of the best defensive players to play in the modern era of the NFL. But also you got 10.5 sacks out of Leonard Floyd. You also got some success out of guys like Samson Ebukam as well. Chris Rumph in terms of some familiarity there too, coming here to New Orleans. And so it wasn't just the most important guys that got the best level of production, although they were the established guys that got some level of production working under Staley, much like Chase Young and Carl Granderson will be established guys now that Brandon Staley is showing up. So with those 2 guys being the benefactors, you kind of look at, okay, you know what the scheme is, you know what they're going to be asked to do as stand-up rushers over on the edge. The next thing is, are they really buying into it? And I want to read you a quote from Cam Jordan, who spoke a little bit about this. And he was actually being introduced by Trey Fluellen actually the other day, or I guess a couple weeks ago when he said it. But anyway, he was talking a little bit about like what this Brandon Staley defense brings. And he says, when you think about how much talent we have on the edge, and now it's a true edge, like 14 years ago, you were saying, hey, there's a difference between defensive ends and then there's edge rushers. And now we're falling into the edge rusher category. So with that being said, we've got a lot more different aspects that we're going to be able to bring to the defense. So there's a buy-in big time amongst the players about this as well. You've heard me talk about the buy-in amongst the secondary, but there's certainly the buy-in amongst the players as well. So what exactly are they buying into, and how exactly is this going to help? That's what I want to dive into next. That's the what and the why. Now let's get into how it is that this 3-4 defense is going to elevate guys like Chase Young and Carl Granderson in 2025. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by Monarch Money. Think of Monarch Money as a one-stop shop financial command center. That's basically like your own personal CFO, helping you balance your books, if you will. One place, one app gives you everything that you need in terms of maintaining visibility of your budgeting, your accounts, your spending, your goals as well, your future financial goals. your investments, so much all in one place. And it even allows you some collaborative opportunities as well. So if you're managing an account with somebody else, you can share through all of that and have full visibility without all of the stress. I love Monarch Money. Because of Monarch Money, I figured out that there was some things I was spending a little bit too much money on, like some subscriptions, food delivery, all the other stuff. Help me weed all of that out. Check them out today. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, family, we're breaking down how it is that the 3-4 defense can benefit the New Orleans Saints in 2025, and specifically how it benefits the edge rushers like Chase Young and Carl Granderson. So we spoke a little bit about the why and the what. Now I want to dive into the how, right? We're going to get into the nitty gritty here, a little bit more deep divey, get into some of the numbers around all of this. And so the first thing I want to highlight is that when it comes to why 3-4 defenses work, it's a couple different things. You need complex rushes, you need versatility, and you need athleticism. And a big part of those complex rushes is like football IQ, right? Understanding what your assignment is, how to do it, how to respond if, you know, your teammate is taken out of position or your offense or the offense counters in some way, all those other pieces. And so when it comes to those three things, Chase Young, Carl Granderson, they both check all of those boxes, especially the athleticism and the speed box, as well as the versatility box, because they can each put their hand in the dirt and be a 3-4 defensive end, or they can stand on the edge and be this stand-up pass rusher, which I think is what you're going to see the most of throughout, you know, the implementation of this 3-4 defense. So everything that the 3-4 defense requires on an individual player level, these guys already have and have already had experience bringing, so on and so forth. Now, the next thing I want to look at is a really, really important metric when it comes to kind of understanding the efficacy of a pass rusher, right? How efficient is that pass rusher? How effective is that pass rusher? And beyond just looking at things like pressures and sacks and pressure to sack percentage or pressure to sack ratio, we can also look at a metric called get off. And basically what that is a measure of time in seconds, typically less than a second is what you would like to see there. But it is a measure for how long it takes for a defensive lineman to get off of the defensive line and across the line of scrimmage. The faster you're going, the more you're putting stress on the offensive line, the quicker you're getting after the quarterback, so on and so forth. Typically, the way that the measures here work is that anything that's less than 0.9 seconds is really good. Anything that's going kind of 0.8 to 0.7 is great. Anything less than 0.7 is elite, right? Like we're talking about Myles Garrett. We're talking about some of the best pass rushers in the NFL, where we're talking about minus 0.7 seconds. And so the good news, though, is that both Chase Young and Carl Granderson land in the really good area of this conversation. Chase Young, 0.83 last year. Carl Granderson, 0.87 last year. Amongst all right defensive ends, so defensive ends that rush from the defensive right side with at least 300 pass rush snaps, Chase Young was number 3 in his category. Carl Granderson, amongst all with 300 pass rushing snaps on the left side, was number 5 in that category amongst defensive linemen. So really, really good production there. And so when you know that these are players that are coming out of 3-point stances more typically, right? Hand in the dirt, eyes down kind of thing, and being able to put together that kind of rating on this metric, that now when you put them in a position to where they're standing up in a 2-point stance off to the side, that there's no sort of verticality that's necessary. You don't have to get up straight. You're already there. You can just rush and push forward. I think that has a lot of value to what it is that bolsters what these guys already show that they can do well. And by the way, just so that everybody is clear, when I talk about a 3-point stance, I'm talking about you've got 3 points of contact with the ground. 1, 2, 1 foot, each foot, and then typically you're leaning over with your hand on the ground. And then you're like looking up from that situation. But then the 2-point stance, which is literally just 2 points of contact, right? It's literally just standing up on the edge. And that gives you the opportunity to kind of get an idea of what you're going to see before the snap, all these other things. So it erases the snap mechanics or the stance mechanics, or at least make it to where there's little to no need for any kind of vertical adjustment necessary. You can just push forward. It gives you a little bit of a heads up look pre-snap, which I think is really important. That does a couple different things. pretty major benefit for them. Allows them to kind of read the offense before the snap a little bit more, kind of see how things are developing in front of them immediately after the snap. You can kind of see a little bit of the protection idea, where the ball's going, where the play flow is, and how to react to that. All of those pieces, you just get to become a little bit more of an intelligent edge rusher because you get more information more quickly, right? Without the adjustment of having to like snap up, stand up, and all those other things. And you're not starting immediately in the lap of an offensive lineman. You're able to kind of pursue and run the arc and really see how things are developing in front of you. And then because of that, get an opportunity to react in kind based on that. You also are looking at more one-on-one opportunities. We've talked about this a ton here on the show. 3 interior defensive linemen, 2 stand-up edge rushers. When you're in those specific looks, which won't be always, but when you're in those specific looks, that's effectively, if you're sending all 5, it's 5-on-5, right? 5 offensive linemen, 5 defensive linemen. That gives you a chance to get those one-on-ones. The other opportunity that you get is that if you can get one of your 3-4 defensive ends matched up on a tackle and threatening that tackle, and it creates some confusion on the offensive line, things like that, allows you to be able to then build off of that and run some twists, some stunts, some zone blitzes or zone rushes and all these other things. I think you'll get a good bit of all of that coming from this too. And so it creates a little bit of that team cohesion. We talked about Cam Jordan kind of buying in so quickly to what this is all going to look like for the defensive line. And that's a big part of this too. You have that team cohesion. If you have Brian Brzee as a, hand in the dirt, 3-4 defensive end, and he wraps to the outside, and all of a sudden Chase Young comes crashing in to take the inside, you got a pretty good opportunity there to get one of those guys free. And a little bit of that team cohesion and taking up additional blockers, confusing offensive linemen, all that, that's going to open up opportunities for other players along the defensive line. So they're operating a little bit more as a unit in that way, even though 2 players are standing and 3 players have their hand in the dirt. It won't make that much of a difference, but it will open up the opportunities for them to be able to maximize some of those other situations. So overall, the big takeaway for me in this is that when you think about things like get off, you think about things like the pressure metrics for both of these guys, you think about how quickly they get off the line of scrimmage, you think about how quickly they get to the quarterback, this defense and what it's going to ask them to do by giving them more information as heads up, stand up edge rushers, by allowing them to be able to utilize their speed and athleticism, run some of these exotic blitz packages that get them involved in twists and stunts and zone reads and all zone runs and rushes and all these other things. I think all of that stands to improve where both of these players in particular, Chase Young and Carl Granderson, will be going from 2024 into 2025. The key is that they got to stay healthy, right? Obviously. And then they got to finish when they get to the quarterback. So this should open the door for them to get to the quarterback a bit more, but finishing at the quarterback is going to be the whole other piece of the ball game, no doubt about that. So I feel really good about where this could go for these players. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But as of right now, it feels like all the pieces will be in place for the Saints to be able to improve their pass rushing thanks to the 3-4 defense that is coming now to New Orleans with Brandon Staley. Coming up next, if the New Orleans Saints really want to maximize all this, one of the things they got to stop doing is shooting themselves in the foot. So let's take a look at penalties, the role that they played and the role that they can no longer play for New Orleans on both sides of the ball. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. If the New Orleans Saints really want to see improvement in 2025, a big thing that's going to have to go right for them is they're going to have to eliminate some of the self-inflicted wounds that they consistently talked about in post-game pressers and midweek pressers and media availability and all those other things during the 2024, 2023, 2022 seasons. So a big part of what they can fix right away, or at least start to trend in the right direction on, is penalties. So that's what I want to break down next. Because look, penalties aren't just a nuisance, right? Penalties can be something that end up keeping points off the board for you as an offense. They could put, opposing offenses in scoring situations. It could turn something like, a 3rd and long that you held for that could have forced a punt, but instead You extend that drive for them and it could become a scoring drive for the opposing team. Like, these are major moments in a game that could sometimes be season defining or at least game defining. So that's why I really wanted to dive into this, but I wanted to get the research right in the meanwhile. So there's a lot for us to go through here. Did you know that the Saints committed 110 penalties last year? That's the most for this team since 2019. So it's been a lot of years, been a long time. They've consistently hovered around the 90 portion and everything like that. And look, I'm no conspirator or anything like that, but I also know that like the Saints have a reputation, and because of the reputation of how much they get flagged more than other teams. But honestly, this wasn't bad. 110 penalties last year, ranked quote unquote only 21st in the NFL last season. So, and they were tied with a few other teams, including, actually, funny enough, the Philadelphia Eagles, who also had 110. But here's the kicker. Here's where things got really challenging for them. 1,003 penalty yards over the course of the season. So that means that you're not just talking about them getting flagged. They're getting flagged in situations that can really, really hurt, right? Taking, walking back, or, having to give up larger chunk penalties, things like that. Like, those are the things that end up creating some issues for you. And so, yeah, there's the penalty count, but if the penalty count was littered with a bunch of little 5-yard penalties and things like that, that don't give up automatic first downs and everything, then that's one thing. But when your penalties are littered with defensive pass interference, holding penalties, illegal contact penalties, defensive holding penalties, which give, these, we're talking about either 15 yards back or spot of the foul plus a fresh set of downs type of penalties. So these were a lot of those self-inflicted wounds that we saw the Saints deal with last season. So beyond the yardage, we also have to remember that this isn't just about like walking backwards on the stat sheet or something like that. We're talking about penalties that can stall drives and penalties that end up creating some really, really frustrated post-game pressers that we've seen over the course of this time. So more specifically, right? Think about this: 6 either holding or false start penalties on third downs last year. So taking something that could have been manageable and turning into something that's unmanageable on third down, right? We just talked about how important third down conversions are for this team and how much they struggled there last year. This played a little bit of a role in it. They also had the, on defense, pass interference. So the Saints weren't called for a ton of pass interference penalties, but the pass interference penalties that they were called for created a lot of struggle for this team. They averaged 23 yards per pass interference penalty, according to True Media. And so that's not just giving up a fresh set of downs. That's giving up a fresh set of downs in the enemy territory, right? Letting them into your yard while they're trying to get into your end zone. Like, that's a big time flipping of the field type of situation. So that to me is another big one as well. So those are pretty huge for me. The other thing that I want to look at is like the stakes and the impact on all of it, right? Like, why does this matter so much? Well, a big reason why it matters is because, like I said, like, penalties aren't just a nuisance. These impact game outcomes, right? We're talking about these big defensive pass interference penalties. We're talking about these third down or fourth down penalties when you're trying to stay on the field and you're going from those situations to turning the ball over and giving the, and having to walk back so that you're punting and keeping them in good field position, or you have the opportunity to force a punt, but instead you're giving them great field position because you just gave them 23 yards on a pass interference penalty on average, all those other things. Then you look at winning teams out there and they're not doing the same things, right? You look at the Kansas City Chiefs, and while they also had, I believe it was 110 penalties. Actually, they're the ones that tied with 110 penalties. The Philadelphia Eagles had 126. So they actually had more penalties, but much fewer in terms of yards, about 100 yards or about 50 yards fewer in terms of yardage. And a lot of their penalties didn't come in these big situations of third and fourth down, defensive pass interference, all of that. Same thing for the Kansas City Chiefs, who just simply don't get whistles the way that other teams get whistles. Like, we should just acknowledge that. But there's a big difference between just getting penalized and how you're being penalized. When are you being penalized? All of those other things. And winning teams have more discipline. Winning teams don't give up penalties on third down. They don't give up penalties on the opposing third downs like these big defensive pass interference penalties. They stay on the field when they convert a third down and don't give it up because of a holding penalty or something like that. That's where winning teams really, really begin to make a difference for themselves. So how do you address this problem going into 2025? I think it's kind of a combination of two things in particular, right? There's an emphasis that has to come from coaching about making sure that they're executing and playing clean football. That's got to be a big part of it. So Brandon Staley working with his defense. It's Kellen Moore working with his offensive line. Brendan Nugent working with his offensive line. Like, it's those big things that have to get done. It's a new level of accountability. We've heard Kellen Moore talk about it. We've heard the players talk about all that. And the players need to have that accountability as well, because it's on every single player too, from an individual standpoint, from the veterans to the rookies. Everybody's got to be ready to play a polished game. You're going to get flags that are disagreeable flags. Like, those are the types of things that are going to happen. But when you know this is a big pivotal moment, there's got to be a level of discipline that comes with that, right? A level of calm, discipline, and maturity that come with that. And so an awareness of how to, handle those types of situations, how to be most effective in those situations, I think is going to be the big things. Those are going to be the two big things. So can it get fixed? Absolutely. Is it going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. I'm not saying that the Saints are going to be one of the least penalized teams in 2025. I'm saying they need to try to be one of the least penalized teams in 2025 if they really want to see some improvement going into this year. So that's a big piece for me, is watching out for those penalties. All right. I'm going to take the weekend here, getting ready for training camp, all that. We're getting started with position previews, biggest stories around each position, getting started with those on Monday. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a party day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.